Welcome student, welcome to this class again. So in the last video I have discussed how we can declare variables. Now here is advanced version of this declaring variable in VB.NET. So VB.NET, as I said, okay, by default it is necessary for us to declare the variables before using them. Okay, what I mean by this statement is that this part where you say dim no1 as int 16 means integer with a 16 bit. Okay, what it means is that you have this no1 is of type integer, similarly no2 of type integer, and so is this sum, right? Now suppose I do not use, if I do not declare this sum, right? See, if I delete it and I'm trying to use the sum, you can see a small a line underlining this sum with a red line, isn't it? That indicates that sum is not declared, it may be inaccessible, okay, due to protection level. So that means what? You cannot use a variable, I'm trying to use this sum, without declaring it. So that's what is by default behavior of Visual Basic.NET. Okay, so now so what we do is that we declare the variable like as I'm doing it over here. So you can have different types of integer, so whichever you want to choose you can choose, but depending on actually how much value you want to store. Okay, so it's each size, the if you go for 32-bit you can store a larger integer value, right? So anyway, so coming to this, now VB, as I said, was a very basic language. Okay, so what happens with that is that you don't need to declare variable. But again, I am contradicting to what I am saying, isn't it? By saying that you have to declare a variable. Now, if you want to make VB.NET behave like the way it was before, then you have an option called this one, option explicit. Option, okay, and you say explicit. Okay, by default the behavior of this one is on. So what you have to do is that you just have to say off. By default option explicit is always on, but now just now I made it option explicit off. So this is just for the compiler to know that I can use a variable without declaring it. Just prior to this, when I was when this statement was not there, so you remember the commenting of line, so you can use this. So this is like a comment, right? So if I try to uh, if I try to use a variable without declaring it, and I of course try to run, then it will immediately end up with an error. Okay, there were errors, right? So what you can do is that, but now if I use this statement option explicit off, okay, and I run this program, alright, now you see that I'm getting the output. That means it did not give me an error. That's because now what is the problem, or what is the behavior of this VB.NET is that we can use a variable without declaring it. So sum is now actually not been declared, but we can use that sum. It is, of course, in this case it is adding two numbers, okay, so it will add like an integer value, right? But let's say somewhere here, okay, if I say sum equals to, so let's say if I use this, for example, if I use a term, let's say I'll use let's say Shillong, right? Right. So if I use this, that means what? This sum was behaving as an integer value here, okay? But in this line, it has changed to a string variable, right? But in that case also, what is happening is that you notice that it is not actually giving you any error as such. Why? Because this sum, okay, so let's say the sum, the value, I will write something like this, the sum of the value of sum now is, okay, so if I say, yeah, I don't need to use this to string also, but anyway you can keep it, okay. So if I run this program, in this part, okay, in here sum was behaving like an integer value, but in the next time I made the sum to be as a string. So that is what the data type of the sum, so you can see that it is printing both of them, right? So now that is a problem with VB.NET. Okay, now right now, okay, why? Because this sum can be used by for any data type. So in a long run, when you write a code, okay, where this is only few lines of code, when you have thousands of lines of code and you do not declare a variable and you are trying to use it, then you might forget what data type you have stored it, and you might change the behavior of the variable, right? So that is what is the problem when you say option explicit is off, okay. But that's not the default behavior. By default always the option explicit is on, even if you do not mention this part. So what will happen is that it is not necessary that you have to make it on, because by default it will always be that option explicit is on. All right, so you can see that it will end up with an error because I haven't declared. Now see, if I say sum, right, sum as integer, right. So now what I'm trying to do is that this sum is of integer. So here sum is no1 plus no2, that is it is behaving like a of course this is of type integer, so it will print. But the moment here it come, let me try to run this program. Okay, the moment I try to run this, this is where it started giving the problem. The problem is some invalid exception, because conversion from string, because it is trying to take a integer value and we are trying to put it into a string. Now another thing with this that we can do over here, I'll tell you about this option explicit on. Okay, if the option explicit is on, but you notice one thing, like this no, okay, no2, which is of type integer also, if I use a value like this one, right, you see that I don't get any error over here. Okay, what is happening is that, see, no1 is a perfect integer without any decimal point, but no2 is not an integer, it's a decimal point, right. But when it comes to finding the sum, let me remove this to, I can comment. Okay, so since I have taught you how to comment, so this is, I have just commented. Now when I run this, all right, I'm still getting the sum is 80. That means what, even though I put the decimal point, okay, the no2 automatically took the integer part, that is this one. Okay, and it added up, but 56 means it took 57. Okay, because 56.564, so it took 57 automatically. Okay, so that is one thing that is happening over here, is that even though my data type is of type integer, but I am able to put a means I am able to put a decimal data type in an integer, right. So sometimes what we need is that we want to become very strict. Okay, that is, we don't want that if there is a integer, I want only integer to be put there, not decimal. All right, so in that case VB has got another option that is called option strict. Okay, so you have to say option strict. Okay, and you, by default here, option strict by default is off. Okay, so you have to make it on. All right, so once you give this, now you notice that this error line has started over here. Okay, so if I run this, immediately this will end up with an error. Okay, that's because now option strict means what, you cannot put a decimal to an integer, you have to put an integer only, so then only the error will go. All right, so option strict by default is off. Okay, but option explicit by default is on. Okay, so this is the feature of Visual Basic through which you can control how the Visual Basic compiler looks at a variable. Okay, so these two are very important. Okay, often very questions are asked based on these two concept of option strict and option explicit. Okay, so a little further to this, what I'll do, I'll be, as I said, I will be giving you this slides also. Okay, so as I said, that in order to declare a decimal point variable in VB, what you have to do is that you can use like dim, let's say ds, you just have to say decimal. Okay, so this is declared as a decimal point, that means you can do it. Similarly, there is a data type called boolean. Okay, boolean is a data type which can store only two values, either a true or a false. All right, so these are something that you haven't used in other languages that you might have learned, like for example C does not have boolean concept. Okay, but in VB it is there. That means you can store the value of true and false by declaring a variable as boolean. Apart from this, there are other data types. All right, so like for example there is date, where you can store the date data type, and a very flexible one is called object. Okay, now I will talk a little bit of this object data type right now. Okay, so if I say this, let's say I will say ob, okay, equals to ob as object. Okay, now the moment we say ob as object, okay, now remember what I said with the option strict. In option strict, when it is on, I cannot put an integer to an means I cannot put a decimal point to an integer variable, right? But when you declare a variable as object, you are, even if your option is option strict is on, but you are still flexible with this particular data type, that is the object. Okay, what I mean is that, see, if I say ob equals to 34, not an error. Okay, if I say ob equals to, let's say in a decimal point, that is also not an error. Okay, if I say ob equals to, let's say again I use the word Shillong. Right, now see, still not an error. even the option strict is on. That's because this object data type is very flexible. It can store any type of information in it. Okay, if by default your option strict is on, still if you want to may have the flexibility of declaring a variable and using it as any data type over there, then you have to use it as an object. All right, but if you want to means if you keep this off, of course this will work as same as it is. Okay, but with off, what happens is that you have some flexibility with integer, decimal and all also. All right, so try to go through this variable types and all. So here it is like different size and all. So here is a description of byte data type, which is which is a decimal data type only, means number data type, but with limited number of means you have an integer that is range from 0 to 255, means you cannot store a value of 285, you cannot store there. All right, so you can do this. Here is something that another one that is called infinity and nan. Okay, so these two are again special values that you can store. Infinity is generally when you divide a number by 0, that's an infinity. Okay, and nan means not a number. Suppose you want to like 0 by 0 is not a number at all. Okay, so you can have these two values also, you can store infinity as well as nan. So these are again different types, or means different values that you can store with an integer value. Okay, so and of course when you have a string data type, you have to put it within double quotation, and if you have a character data type, we put it inside a double quotation or a single quotation. Both way you can work on. Okay, all right, so that is all about the different data types. And another interesting thing that you can do with this is another value. Okay, so there are, I already talked about two different special values, that is called infinity and nan, and another special value that I will talk about is this nothing. Okay, nothing is a value that we can use only with object data type. If you want to, like for example no1, if I do not initialize anything, since it's a type of integer, the value will be 0. If it's a string, if I don't put any value, then it is null, right? But in an object, if you want to put nothing to it, means you don't want to put anything in an object, so ob equals to, you just have to say nothing. Okay, so that means this ob is initialized to nothing right now. So this is only applicable to an object data type, not to integer, not to string, not to character, not to decimal. All right, so that's a value that is applicable to the object data type. All right, so okay, and here is something that again you will need when you will be doing some other programs, that is you can convert one data type to another data type by using this concept of C. Okay, C bool means you will convert it to a boolean, C byte means you will convert it to an byte, C character. Okay, what I mean, like for example let's say option strict is on right now, isn't it? So if I give this one as 78, right, so you can see that there is a error over there. Okay, option strict, okay, it won't allow me to convert this one to, because the this is a decimal data type which I am trying to put in integer variable, right, which is not possible right now. Why? Because my option strict is on. So to convert it to a decimal or integer, you can use the value c in, convert to in, C stands for convert. Okay, and then you put it this one. So what happens now, it will be taking it, but it will convert it to an integer and put it. Okay, this is the these are some of the functions that is there in VB for converting one data type to another data type. So all these functions are over here: convert to boolean, convert to date, convert to integer, convert to short. All these are the data types that you can convert over here. All right, so you can do all these things. This part I will discuss in the next class. Okay, so this is everything about the variables that you can means all about the variables that is there in your syllabus also. Okay, so what you can do with the variables. So now that you know how to declare variables, what are the different ways of declaring variables, please do practice all these programs. Okay, type. Okay, and as usual, you have to write a summary to this video also. All right, thank you.